From close and afar, it's excellent to see you all here. My name is Dr. Carlos Bukovskis. I am the director of the Latvian Institute of International Affairs. This is Monday, April the 3rd, and it's snowing outside in Riga. And this is a public discussion, who is who in the new European neighborhood. And this is part of the 10th Riga Dialogue discussions, 10th year, the anniversary year for the Riga Dialogue, which is an event organized in order to discuss how things are going in the both sides of the ocean, the geopolitics, security, and to put it bluntly, what to do with Russia. And this is the public part of the event. So in this case, we're extremely happy to see full house today. Those of you watching us online, those of us watching you, not yet watching online, but and to those of you here, I want to use the opportunity and congratulate my beloved Finland with tomorrow at 3 o'clock, right? Which time zone, though?
Brussels time zone.
Brussels time zone. Finland is finally becoming the member of the NATO. And we have exquisite speakers today, and I don't want to hold the discussion back anymore much because of the opportunity that we have. We have excellent audience also here, eager to ask questions. So I believe we're going to have a very thought-provoking and interesting discussion today with a lot of questions raised. So I will start the discussion. I'm going to sit down now, so you don't have to stand up. I think everybody sees you. I will start the discussion with probably introducing the speakers. Dr. Nils Schmidt, foreign policy spokesman for the Social Democratic Party and member of the Bundestag since 2017, serves on the Committee of Foreign Affairs. Right?
Right.
Good. Jari Vilen, Finnish diplomat and former Minister of Foreign Trade and European Affairs of Finland. And when I was researching you, I found an interesting thing in your Wikipedia page. That
this is intriguing now. There's never good things in Wikipedia usually.
No, the one which turned my attention was held numerous confidential posts during his career. So in this case, it's we are more than happy to have you here. Velina Chkarova, founder for A Conscious Experience, former director of the Austrian Institute for European Security Policy, and you're writing a book called Dragon Bear, which is a very interesting title in my mind. I don't know what the book is about. Well, it's on China and Russia relations, but I am already eager to read it because the title Dragon Bear sounds...
It's a hybrid?
Hybrid, yes.
Not only.
Mikhail Yanelidze, former first deputy prime minister of Georgia, former minister of foreign affairs of Georgia, now chairman of the Center for European Governance and Economy. And Dr. Mykola Kaputinenko is joining us online. You see him very well. Associate professor at the Institute of International Relations of Kiev National Taras Shevchenko University, and also associate expert at the International Center for Policy Studies. So I asked the speakers to be nice and play along and keep their initial remarks in 7 minutes, no longer. And the idea is today to understand the geopolitical and diplomatic effects of the past year's experiences. Which countries, which organizations have went in which direction, which are valid partners, which are trustworthy partners, and which no longer, in this case, in the middle or longer term, can be considered the ones. And I would like to ask Mykola, if you could go first, and the view from Ukraine. Your country has been affected over the past year the most, so I believe this is just the right place for me to ask you to comment first. Please.
Thank you very much. This is a very broad topic. Usually all the conversations about security and implications of the war in the recent year are quite broad, and I will try to focus on several things which probably go a little bit beyond identifying principal friends or foes, or how things are changing in perceptions, mutual perceptions of the countries involved. I would firstly discuss a little bit an issue of probable scenarios of the war which I believe will affect further the European security and global security as well. Then I will briefly describe my feelings about the crisis of the international order we are experiencing and this war being a part of it. And finally, I will also concentrate on the major strategies of the countries involved and how much they have changed during the war. So this will be my three primary things to focus, and if there are any additional questions, I'll be happy to comment. So what I take from the recent years' experience is that we are facing a very deep crisis in international security setting, which went far beyond the bilateral conflict between Russia and Ukraine. And this war is not only about the future of both these countries or of relations between them, but also it has become the war about the rules of the game in the subsequent international order. Probably something which major countries, major stakeholders have not been so well prepared to, but nevertheless that happened because of the decision of the Russian leadership to invade and to launch the war, which was quite risky, but nevertheless it happened. So after the war, a year of the war is over, there is a great deal of optimism in Ukraine about the country's ability to withstand the aggression and possibly on the future perspectives. But I'm on a more skeptical side. I think that generally this war follows the patterns of protracted military conflicts, which tend to be long-lasting in recent decades. And because of that, we most likely are facing a long-lasting war with no place for compromise so far, with a war which radicalizes the demands of all countries involved, and it is gradually spilling over to the global dimension, because in my view, this conflict has several dimensions, and the global one is becoming more and more important as long as the war continues. This is becoming a clash between, not only between Russia and Ukraine, but also between the two possible future scenarios for the international order. So I'm far from thinking that this war is likely to be over during this year. It is probably, it's more or less possible that it will de-escalate in one way or another. Probably it will look like a bigger version of the conflict in Donbass, which we have been experiencing between 2014 and 2022. But so far, I believe that just the way as Ukraine has been able to withstand Russian military aggression, Russia has been able to withstand Western political pressure. So because of that, it looks like we're still facing some long distance to go before this war is resolved in one way or another. Issue which is connected to this is the issue of several dimensions. I think that this war can be more or less properly described by what is called the power transition theory, which stipulates that as soon as the gap between the rising challenger of the hegemony and the existing hegemon is getting closer, the risk of instability is rising, and the probability of regional conflicts is also rising, because both camps, both poles, have some incentive to escalate. So I believe that this war is affecting long-term strategic interests of great powers, in particular of the United States, of China, and of the European Union, and of course of Russia, but Russia is a different story. But other major countries involved, they are facing some probabilities and some challenges. I believe that the intermediate results indicate that the United States is handling this war better than the others, probably being able to consolidate the West and also to enhance its leadership and to take a more proactive role in handling the Chinese threat. China has been facing a number of challenges and a number of risks because of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. First of all, this goes somehow against China's rhetoric and China's plan of alternative international order. It has been putting forward in recent decade or so. To a certain extent, China, being on the wrong side of history, is not interested in this war strategically. But on the other hand, it provides China with a bunch of tactical advantages, in particular with an opportunity to get a better framework for further relations with Russia, to exploit the preferences of Russia's energy resources supplies, to get more access to the Russian market, and generally to tie Russia more closely to its strategic objectives. On the other hand, China is paying the price of weakening its positions in Europe, in running a higher risk of confrontation with the United States, and generally of being not so very well prepared to such kind of a challenge in this particular moment. I also believe that the European Union is paying the heavy price, and generally I was quite skeptical about how Europe was handling the conflict between Russia and Ukraine in the form it existed between 2014 and 2022. And those mistakes are being felt right now, and I believe that Europe is losing quite a lot, being both hit negatively by its disruption of relations with China and facing economic problems and having a very troublesome conventional war in the neighborhood. So there is a huge challenge which I believe cannot be fully compensated by the developments like Finland joining NATO, for instance, which certainly is a reason to celebrate. This has become a really global conflict. I'm not saying it because I believe that Ukrainian issues should be at the front pages of the newspapers, and Ukraine should be in the center of the international agenda. I just think that this is the crisis which really indicates some fundamental shifts, and this is certainly not very good news for Ukraine as well. I also had a hypothesis when the war started a year ago that the war itself has not transformed dramatically. The strategies all the countries involved have been applying before 2022, meaning that Russia was trying to somehow challenge, undermine existing security architecture in Europe, which it continued to do, but with different means during the war. Europe was trying to minimize risks and to handle somehow this problem more or less cautiously, without some radical moves. And generally, this has been the line of European response, strategic response to the war. Certainly, I do understand the dilemmas Germany, for instance, was facing in adapting its foreign policy strategy and security strategy towards new realities, but nevertheless, it is rooted in the desire to minimize risks. I also see this kind of continuation of the line by the United States of America, which was before the war trying to figure out how much support for Ukraine would be enough, whether weapons should be supplied, for instance, how much financial support Ukraine should be given in order to keep the situation under control, and on the other hand, not to risk further escalation. Certainly, the war has changed the framework, but generally, the essence of this dilemma has been the same. That is the challenge, in my view, that the war has so far been much more serious challenge than the responses provided. Probably it has been underestimated in some ways, and not only increase in the amount of weapons and money supplied to Ukraine is necessary as a reaction to this war. It should be understood that this war is about the future of international security and the future rules of the game. And probably, I do know I'm a realist, let's put it like this, a pragmatist. I think that countries should not be guided by some idealistic principles. They should be pragmatic. So what I think is one of the lessons I take from this is that Europe needs a very well-considered, well-calculated strategy under the current situation. Europe is the country which has been hit most among the great powers by this war. And probably this issue is requiring much more attention for quite a long period of time, because this war is going to be a long war. And this certainly is not only Ukraine's problem. I will stop here. I hope I'm quite within the time limit. Thank you.
Mikola, thank you so much. This was a very, very, very great overview of where the world currently stands. I have a very quick follow-up question to you. You said this war is going to be very long. How long? What is your estimate?
Well, I believe it will not be over. Its military phase will not be over before the end of 2023. And I think that the most likely scenario is that the escalation level will drop to some level, but will not be over. But this will not be a frozen conflict. So it is going to be low intensity military conflict for years. I would say 5-10 years is quite possible. I guess, unfortunately.
Mikola, thank you. I will be blunt in this situation. I hope you're wrong about this, and it's going to be over much sooner than that. With this, I'm going to turn to Jari. Finland's foreign security policy change. It is changing the EU's and NATO's landscape as well. What can you say about it?
I think tomorrow will be a historical day, not just for the Finland, but I think it's going to be historical for the whole European Union and NATO. And it's also historical in that respect that tomorrow will actually be probably the strongest evidence of the total failure of the Russian political agenda and narrative what they have put forward. I think nothing more demonstrates the total failure of the Russian narrative when Finland, who just 1 year ago was in a position that no, NATO membership is totally out of our questions, that we are happy and satisfied with the current circumstances. 48 hours after the Russian attack in 24th of February last year, in 48 hours, the Finnish people decided to join the NATO. It is the citizens, and this is actually first time in Finnish history, that the citizens decided to lead the political process in Finland. We've been a country which has a tradition, a trust on the leadership of the political leadership and their guidance. But in this war was such a profound change in our society and mindset for the Finnish people that they demanded the NATO membership because they had accurate information. I really underline the freedom, press freedom and possibilities to have information and being able to assess and digest information. People decided that the only way to protect our borders and the security of our children is joining the NATO. Then came the members of the parliament, then came the government, and the last person was the president. And tomorrow afternoon, the flag will be raised next to the Estonian flag and be between Estonian and French flag in the NATO headquarters. I tell you that tomorrow Latvia will be a safer place. Finland will be a safer place. And NATO will be safer with all the capabilities that we are bringing on the table. We will be always taking care of our own borders. We are capable of doing that, but we will bring in also the capabilities that NATO has not seen before. We have 900,000 men reserves. We have 280,000 soldiers ready for the combat anytime, which is the same strength as the Ukrainian army. And we bring in the safety and security. And you know, Finns are very serious, but also very pragmatic people. So when we are coming to defend our borders, but we also fulfill our commitments to defend your borders, NATO borders, and the borders with all our partners in the NATO. And I think this is also some mindset that Finland is ongoing at the moment, that we are making our own commitments seriously. And the process that we all know, the twists and turns that we had in the ratification process in there, still I have to say it's one of the fastest ratification processes in NATO history. And I will say optimistically always, what we had to learn from the Hungary or from the Turkey tells also that this is an alliance and this is a defense union where all the member states' interest has to be taken into account. And therefore I think it's important that Finland is now much more prepared in this 8 months' time to understand that what kind of alliance we are joining and what is anticipated, accepted from our side. So it is a profound change in our political setup, but it is part of the broader picture, as I said. And I sincerely hope also, Mikola, that you're wrong about how long the war might last. But agree with you that those who are optimistic that it can be over with one massive counterattack or something like that, I do not foresee this kind of scenario. If I would have to look in the history, I might be unfortunately looking in something like what happened in Korean Peninsula 1950 to 53, when the war was dragging on and actually fighting was in a very small area in the last 2 years before the political process eventually was able to find not the peace, but the ceasefire, which has lasted for 70 years. And maybe this is one of the scenarios that we're looking forward in there. But what Russia did actually change, as you also demonstrated there, the global security structure, and actually underlined also the competition that is ongoing between the USA and China, not just between Russia and USA, but particularly the competition between US and China. I think we will hear more later from my colleagues on the panel on that fact. But it's underlined the realities which I think we have to make the reality check. We are in the competition between the totalitarian regimes and the democratic nations of the world and the West. And we should not forget this focus that we are having then. It also changed the security structure in Europe, and of course also the rules-based security order that was built after the Second World War. So we are facing really fundamental questions that we need to find the answers. And what I think is most important thing, and which you also underlined, Mikola, in your speech there, is the question of endurance. That we have to prepare ourselves for the long-term challenge. We are challenged in not just the military in Ukraine, but also politically, economically, technologically, ideologically, what we are facing in there. And that is actually one of the fundamental questions that we have, particularly inside the NATO, but also in the European Union. I have this small hobby that I always tend to find myself defending the European Union role due to the fact that I've been also serving in the European Union External Action Service. But the fact is that we should not forget the fact that how amazing decision European Union has been able to do. Nobody would have predicted, not Putin did not predict, how unified the Europe can be and how many decisions which were previously totally unforeseeable. European Union has been done. And the question what we need to have, and I know that for example in Latvia you also having the discussion about the future of the Europe and European Union. This war forces us also to look the European Union develop in a different way. It forces us to look what is the mission that the European Union has. Peace mission, but mission of prosperity, mission of democracy, what need to have. It forces us to look in a completely different manner. And the fact actually is that today we in the European Union do not have a decision how to support the Ukraine in the next year. Particularly the fact with the financial resources that we've been providing for the Ukraine to making sure that the society can function, the administration can function, the regime can function in there. We have the money for this year, but we need to initiate this discussion also for the next year, and we haven't really done that yet. And this I'm a bit pessimistic, let me put it this way, that we are too much entangled always in our own domestic political agenda issues, that I sincerely hope that we would have this European leadership that Europe also needs, that we have been successful, and I raise my hat to the Commission President particularly for her role to be able to put the European nations together for the support. But we also need to have a longer perspective about how the Europe is continuing their support, unwavering support to Ukraine. But how do we prepare ourselves for the enlargement for the Ukraine, enlargement for the Western Balkans, which are there, and which are their test grounds to us that if we don't succeed in this one, we have failed on the ultimate mission what we have for defending the democracies and defending our way of life, what also the European Commission President and Mr. Borrell has been saying before. I'm amazingly short, I'm sorry for that.
No, you're excellent, thank you. Another follow-up question, another how long? I'm an academician, I can be provocative. You're a diplomat, experienced one. Finland is joining. Our neighboring country, Sweden, is still lingering somewhere in the air, and we're all hoping that it's going to be sooner than later. How soon?
I can repeat only what the Secretary General has said, that he hopes and believes that it will be in Vilnius summit in July. And maybe one thing to show in the solidarity to our Swedish colleagues, and I have to confess that half of my roots are in Sweden. I'm from the border area between there. So Finland has already ratified the Swedish accession to the NATO. So in our case, it's only 2 more member states, not 3 more member states tomorrow. So it's still only 2 left in there. But I'm optimistic that as we learn from the process concerning the Finnish ratification, there are domestic political issues or some other political issues which are playing their role, and I'm quite optimistic that in due time also the hindrance that concerning Sweden will be solved. But also I can say that what I said, Latvia will tomorrow be much safer. Sweden will also be tomorrow much safer than it is today. So in that respect, the Sweden do not have, and we have not felt that we would have the imminent threat on ourselves, and I think that the same case happens in Sweden. I'm only asking my Swedish colleagues to be patient and believe the fact that they have one more alliance inside the NATO since tomorrow that will be supporting their bid.
Thank you. That was a really encouraging answer. Michael, let's turn to Georgia now. And well, Georgia has been in a complicated situation for a very, very long time. Let's not forget 2008. And then you are also in a very complicated situation now, and you are in a rather complicated also political positioning on how to deal with Russia, how to join the European Union. What is your comment on this? How is your country feeling?
Yes, Georgia has been in a complicated situation for many years already. When you talk about neighborhood policy, back then, 20 years ago, due to Georgia's geographic location, it was outside of the EU neighborhood policy. And since then, we went through different steps. In 10 years after that, we achieved which led Georgia to become a front runner in the Eastern Partnership project with its reforms, the strengths of institutions ready to
I think it's on.
Georgia continued on this path because, and it continued doing so despite the government or any political party in power, because it was a call and interest and the will of Georgian people to pursue this path. This will cannot be changed in one day or by any political party or political elite. It was clearly stated once again by Georgian people when they marched and protested against the law which was against the European future of Georgia, against democracy of Georgia, and against the constitution of Georgia, because you probably know that it was Georgian dream which supported inclusion of the Georgia's European and Euro-Atlantic future in the constitution of Georgia. So, on the European path, definitely Georgia is supported by the majority of Georgian population. And we have a chance now, which for which we were looking for many years. But it was very difficult to get even recognition of our perspective until last year. When it comes to the question of this panel is who is who in the European neighborhood and about trust and validity of partners, I have to say that Georgia proved to be a solid partner and valid partner and a trusted partner of the West and Euro-Atlantic community in our region. proved to be a contributor to international peace and security for many years, and we proved it with our blood. When we were the largest per capita troop contributor after the US in the fight for terrorism, and I guess there are no public figures available how many foreign fighters died in Ukraine, but Georgians are among, the most suffered. It's up to 40 Georgians who died in this war during this 1 year, and they continue to fight there and on the front lines. Georgia was the first country to take the fight against the revisionist geopolitics of Russia in 2008. And Georgia at that moment felt that it was not supported by the transatlantic community as much as it would have been worthy for the transatlantic, not only for Georgia, but the whole transatlantic peace and security. The way the transatlantic community approached Russia in 2008 actually caused the problems and the situation we are in today. So the response, which was not the right response, encouraged Russia to make next steps towards, which was steps related to Crimea, and then now this full-scale invasion and war in Ukraine. And this is the Russian style. This is Russian tactics. So they are claiming more and getting then what they want. So this was the case with Georgia, right? And it was quite similar to the scenario which we have now in Ukraine. Russia declared that they wanted to change the government in Georgia. And they initiated their attack on Tbilisi. And then the reaction was like to stop Russia from changing the government in Georgia and attacking Tbilisi. But then as a result, Russia took 20% of Georgian territories, which is still under the Russian occupation, still under the Russian tanks, and Russia continues the creeping occupation and even processes leading to annexation of those territories of Georgia. And when I listen to the perspectives from different actors in transatlantic community, and here the case of Korea was mentioned. So I think this will be again a big mistake of the Euro-Atlantic community to let this war be resolved in a way as, for instance, Korean case. If Russia will be allowed to get control of those occupied regions, which they have now in Ukraine, and then there will be a deal, a new negotiation or new reset in the relations with Russia, that would be the biggest challenge for Europe. So, finally, the West has to understand the Russian tactics. Finally, the West has to make moves on its own and not moves just in response of Russian actions. And this is the key principle which has to be taken into consideration when discussing the future of the European neighborhood and Europe in general. And here I think we have to talk not only about the past, but about the future, right? And I want to say that, first of all, that will be the, despite all the complications, it will be the biggest mistake not to give a candidate status to Georgia. This is the first what has to be done with regards to Georgia. Secondly, I think it is very important that this candidate status is monitored very effectively and strongly by the European Union. And it can be done through stronger support of the civil society in Georgia. Because civil society in Georgia is strong. The society in Georgia is strong, and society can keep accountable any government in Georgia and will not allow any power to shift from this path. But if civil society will be weakened and will not have enough support from our friends, then this mission can be more difficult. Secondly, I think, but third, when we talk about the next steps, it is important that European Union makes the first steps of changing from normative power to geopolitical power, and it happens in Ukraine and Georgia. And in Georgian case, it should be reflected into security mechanisms, which will be based on military presence of the European Union and the European member states in Georgia. Georgia has a ceasefire agreement with the Russian Federation, and European Union was a guarantor of the fulfillment of these 6 points. And one of the most important points there is creation of international security mechanisms. And European Union is doing, and European member states are doing huge work supporting Georgia with its mission. But this mission should be strengthened and should change from a civil mission to a military and security mission. Then it should be so to say, a platform and opportunity to make a next step on NATO membership of Georgia, which will be then followed by the EU membership. And I put this as a 10-year plan, which is very realistic, despite some pessimistic scenarios, which is about 5 to 10 years war in Ukraine. I think if this kind of proactive steps will be made by the transatlantic community, by the European Union, and Ukraine will be supported not only in a way that helps them, resist Russian aggression, but help Ukraine to counter and make offensive steps, then this is the scenario which will make Ukraine, Georgia, and the eastern part of Europe safe and secure, and Europe transform into a geopolitical power.
Thank you, Mikhail. I think I'll have to give it back to you. Ah, no, your microphone worked. This was off. So you have been holding it for, well, without much of the reason. Another complicated how long question. Based on what you explained, and you know that European Union candidate status, European Union membership, it all comes with countries and societies proving that they are fulfilling the criteria, that they are fitting in with the general club rules that exist in the European Union. There is a list of chapters, a list of points that Georgia has to still fulfill in order to become a candidate country. One of those is domestic political antagonisms and squabbles that can get rather dire. So, taking this into account, how long do you think it will take to fulfill those criteria? I hope. Nestor?
It is really very difficult to say what will be the dynamics of internal politics, right, in Georgia. And you can never say it about any country, because you can see political polarization everywhere. But it's not about polarization, but it's about radicalization, which should be avoided. We definitely hope to see European integration and candidate status as a key factor for reducing the radicalization in Georgian politics. But unfortunately, it has not been the case until now. Hope it will change, but again, I think that giving a candidate status is just a start, not the end of the process of membership. So candidate status should be judged according to the technical merits and technical readiness of institutions and other factors. And definitely Georgia has to follow all these 12 recommendations which were provided by the European Commission, but at the same time, you know, there should be a decision which will take into consideration also the next steps. And this is what I was talking about when, giving an opportunity for Russian disinformation or the pro-Russian groups to claim that Europe is not ready to accept again Georgia and is leaving behind Georgia, etc. So, linking it with political factors, I think will be a mistake. And I believe that Georgia and Georgian civil society and Georgian people will find its way out of this complicated situation. Elections are coming, not only in Georgia, but also in Europe, in US, etc., in Russia as well. But I think this is the decision, candidate status decision, which has to be taken now. And definitely it will support pro-European voices, it will support pro-European stance in Georgia, and it will help to also in internal politics stabilize the situation more.
Thank you.
I think I have to be quiet because luckily you are next to me and you have to comment on behalf of the fraction.
Let's finish the round, and then yeah. It's excellent, of course. But if in this case, let's just hear first the Austrian and the German view on the matters. Austria has been a neutral country for a very long time, and at the same time a very active European Union member country. What is your outlook over this past year? What has changed? Whom can we trust and who we cannot trust?
Thank you very much. First, allow me to put my actual hat, which is the one of geopolitical strategies, just to elaborate for a few minutes on what my Ukrainian colleague and my Finnish colleague and Georgian colleague have been pointing out when it comes to the global order, and I really want to communicate this message as I've been dealing with some of these issues for the last 20 years. So I argue first and foremost that Russia's decision on a full-scale war, I mean to make the move, I agree with my Ukrainian colleague, by the way, and I saw this subjugation efforts in a framework of around 5 to 10 years in several stages. But I argue that the Russian president took this decision on a full-scale war against Ukraine in order also to position Russia in this newly emerging systemic conflict between United States and China, to get the pole position by subjugating the second largest country in Europe. And practically, even though that it would be the junior partner of a new systemic rival, namely of China, it would be able to solve two issues in general. First, obviously, to get the access to one of the most critical areas of Europe, by doing so, controlling the flows in the future, controlling the flows between Asia and Europe, and having a leverage against China. But then again, of course, on the other hand, to practically destroy the security order from the last 30 years, and in a longer run from the last 70 years together with China. So things are much more complicated and much more serious than we tend to think here in Europe. Mostly, of course, our political decision makers, as they are constrained under this 2 to 3 years decision-making process, so that they don't have the time to deal with the strategic issues. And I think that one of, obviously, of the dimensions of the decision-making next to the goal of subjugating Ukraine in political, economic, and societal terms, and destroying the security order of Europe, creating a kind of concert of powers per 19th century, there is this very much overlooked systemic dimension where, as I said, the Russian president has had the ambitions, and still having the ambitions, to amplify the systemic conflict, to trigger, in fact, the confrontation a la Cold War 2.0 scenario, in which then Russia would be better positioned than, in fact, the European allies of the United States, as we've already observing. I mean, and now I'm going to the actual question, Austria. Well, as someone who is based in what we use as a cliche, the island of the blessed, free riding on the security and defense efforts by our neighbors, and also the neutral but to the teeth militarily equipped Switzerland, I argued that Austria has been turning into an island of security policy reality denier. And it is a very striking contrast, while we've been listening to the Finnish colleague, how the process has been, well, quite quickly facilitated in Finland. And just to give you a basic idea, Finland and Austria joined together, and Sweden as well. So the three neutrals joined together the European Union in 1995. So what happened to the three neutrals is that two of the three neutrals collectively decided bottom up, that means society decided in both countries to apply for NATO membership. And by the way, I argued that after the Turkish election, we can discuss that afterwards, the thing with Sweden will be settled as well. So we will have two new NATO members. Now let me just wrap it up for you what happened in Austria. In Austria, our government appeared and claimed that neutrality is and remains part of our identity. I'm Austrian citizen, by the way, so I actually, of course, identify, or even though that I come from another European country, of course, with this country. So, remains part of our identity means also there is zero demand from society to even have any security debate in the country. And now in, let's say, the framework of more than 400 days of Russia's war against Ukraine, we have had zero debate at home about the security implications from the war on the environment of Europe, the security implications of the fact that two of our neutral partners decided to join NATO, and then, of course, the security implications in the direct eastern and southern neighborhood. So here, for instance, Austria, despite a, let's say, very modest budget, defense budget of 0.7, I know, it's 0.7, has been overproportionally contributing to the missions and operations of the common security and defense policy of the European Union. It's not that grim that there is only the one side of the story when it comes to the Austrian role. On the opposite, despite these limitations, political and budgetary ones, Austria has been contributing overproportionally. And now here the question is, what comes next? Now, we in Austria, around 100 experts from academia, from think tanks, from consultancies, businesses, have signed, meanwhile, 2 open letters. And these are not the open letters that Germany likes to sign when it comes to manifesting for peace. We actually signed 2 open letters to the government and to the president asking for security debate. We didn't ask for NATO membership. We didn't ask to question the neutrality. We asked for security debate first and foremost to explain to the people what's really at stake and what is really going on in security and defense terms, because people do not understand. And of course, then they start asking questions based on limited information. And the obvious thing that happens is that, for instance, sanctions policy of the European Union is blamed for the inflation. This kind of chains of events is happening with the political consequences that the very same government has lost in the largest province of Austria just recently to our right-wing populist party that gained 12%. 12%. And of course, what you can imagine is going to happen next is that everything is going to be limited to domestic policy. So we are going to continue being in a limbo in which our politicians are going to convince the society that there is no demand for any debates on neutrality, future of European security, whatsoever when it comes to the Russia's war against Ukraine. Now, Austria, of course, is highlighting that it is militarily neutral. That means no military aid, direct military aid to Ukraine, no military bases on Austrian soil, and no, obviously, no participation in military alliances. At the very same time, our government has been pointing out for the last 14 months that we are politically not neutral. And right now, as we learned from the most recent Russian paper on foreign policy, the most recent document on foreign policy, we belong to those countries, to the list of those countries that are seen as part of the aggressive West. So there is this dichotomy where on the one hand, we are being told that our neutrality is this protection umbrella that will actually enable us to be safe and sound without anything that's needed to be done at home. Okay, what was announced, that is the new element, and I argue that it was not a consequence of the war, but it was a consequence of actually of the obligations that Austria, together with other member states, with all other member states, committed within the common security and defense policy, namely to increase the defense budget. But of course, politically, it was more or less communicated that this 17, 18 billion euro that will be spent in the next probably 10, 15 years are, so to say, a consequence of Russia's war against Ukraine. And yet, if you take a look at the documents and the commitments of the member states, they all have been actually obliging themselves to the 2% of GDP within the common security and defense policy. So, the downside seems to me still a little bit higher than the upside. Yes, Austria, politically not neutral, committing to a lot of humanitarian aid. I think that it is at the top of the member states providing humanitarian aid for Ukraine, and yet at the same time militarily not just an island of the blessed, as I said, but I would even argue an island of the security policy reality denier.
Thank you, Elena, so much. There was one element somewhere in the middle of your intervention that caught my eye, about Russia's adjustment to the new situation. Again, it's a lot of talk about Russian-Chinese relations, and I was starting to wonder, just brainstorming here, how long do we have until the world, or maybe Russia itself, will adjust to the new situation that it is living in? So we have had sanctions for about a year. We have been trying to hit Russia in different manners and supporting Ukraine so that Ukraine directly hits, in this case, the Russian military attacking Ukraine. But how long would it take for Russia to be in the situation that they are like, yeah, okay, this is the new normal also for us? Because this is what Putin has been a little bit trying to convey already for the past month at least.
Well, in fact, Russia was prepared between the two options of short and long war. And since the option of short war failed dramatically at the beginning of the war, Russia immediately switched off towards the option of long war. So Russia was prepared and has been preparing for the long war as it has been preparing for the long game. Here, I think that we have a problem in Europe. Russia is playing for time because what I argue is that not all European states are geopolitically on the same page. And we are all democracies. Our societies determine who is coming to power. I mean, see what happened to Finland just yesterday. I mean, she still has, of course, good chances to be part of the coalition, of a coalition government with her party, but this is what democracies are. And, you know, security policy isn't sexy. It's not selling at home. People want security, they want predictability. So I argue that we are the ones that should prepare our societies. Our politicians should explain things to the population when it comes to these complexities, but I often have the feeling that they do not understand the real complexities of our time. And because of, you know, the constraints, as I said, of the political decision-making process, they are more or less destined to reactionary approach rather than a proactive one that really sets agenda, that looks ahead of, you know, the horizon. And this is where we are right now. I mean, take a look at, once again, let me give you an example of Austria. We were the only country, together with Hungary and Bulgaria, a great group, by the way, and I'm Bulgarian by origin, so I can really bash my home country about it. We were the only 3 countries in the European Union family that did not have a video message by the Ukrainian president. Can you imagine? And it was actually an internal, a domestic issue. Our oppositional political force, the liberals, tried a year ago to invite the Ukrainian president and to have the video message as a strong signal of solidarity. But because of this sensitivities at home because we have a strong, as I said, and now it's becoming even stronger, right-wing populist party at the parliament. Our social democrats are also split very much on the issue. So we actually had the video message just last week. And you know what happened? The whole fraction of the right-wing populist party initiated a retreat from the parliament before the video message began, and more than half of the social democrats was absent. This is not the way forward. It is about us, and in such a critical moment, it should not be about party politics, because we all have one and the same party, and this is the future of our Europe. This is our Europe. So this should be our common party, I argue.
Thank you, Valina, so much for the explanation of so many things that we occasionally tend to miss, but which are extremely important, actually, when you put them in the bigger picture. Speaking about social democrats, Dr. Nils Schmidt.
Politics.
And politics. Last but definitely not least. We all have been looking at Germany usually as a leader. Some have been saying that economic-wise, yes, Germany should be the leader. Politically, diplomatically, Germany should be the leader. Military, well, there are reasons not to necessarily to be. So there came Zeitenwende. So in this situation, could you please explain, in the light of the Zeitenwende, Germany's outlook on the European Union's neighborhood? What it is and how will it look like?
Well, as you surely know, Zeitenwende means that we have entered a new era in European politics or even in world politics. And so Zeitenwende is about German society, about raising awareness for the need to invest more in defense, to strengthen the eastern flank of NATO, to reduce energy dependency, or even end energy dependency on Russia. And so I think the consequences for the European neighborhood policy are not the first and primary motivation behind Zeitenwende. It was very much about adapting German foreign policy to this new era, to this we've entered. And this means that in Europe it's getting colder. We need a more robust policy towards Russia, including taking care of the military dimension of this relationship. It also means that we have to leave behind some of the remaining illusions about the nature of the Russian foreign policy. And in this respect, the Zeitenwende speech was a rather swift response. Just 3 days after the invasion started, the Chancellor gave the speech to the Bundestag, and probably it was the most substantial speech by any Western leader on the issue. I do not talk about very impressive speeches given by President Zelensky, of course, for evident reasons. And of course we have seen speeches by Joe Biden, especially in Poland, which were also very forthcoming. But in terms of substance, of policy substance, this was probably the most far-reaching speech given by any of the Western leaders. And so it is about changing the attitude of Germans towards weapons deliveries and towards the military element in international relations. We need to accept and we need to sort of relearn that the military dimension is there, that you cannot just expel it from your reality. And that's why the basic tenet of NATO, deterrence and dialogue, still holds. But it's much more about deterrence than about dialogue, especially when it comes to Russia. And there's a lot of work to do inside German society, not because there's such a widespread pacifist mood, but there is this idea that peace should prevail. And there's a strong longing for peace, which does not take into account any reality on the ground. For example, in Ukraine, it's just about having peace and living in peace. And for many years, the main conclusion drawn by the German public from World War II was a never again war. Very simple. And now we have to learn that the real never again is never again imperialism, never again aggressive nationalism, never again shall we accept the violation of borders, never again shall we accept that one army invades the country of another country. And this was spelled out by a less publicly received speech by the Chancellor on the 8th of May last year. Because for the first time, a Chancellor explained to his audience, to his fellow citizens, that the main conclusion to be drawn from the German atrocities during World War II is not never again war, it's never again. It's never again shall we accept the removal of borders by force. And I think this will take some time to garner full support of Germans, but surely I can tell you that many Germans have lost their last illusions about Russia. So I think now it's the time to solidify this ground within German society. When it comes to Europe at large, of course we have seen two major consequences of the war. One is a regaining of interest and in NATO. So NATO is back. So we are back to basics, so to speak. And we've also seen that the European Union can make a difference when it comes to sanctions on the one side and to maintain a unified front against Russia, but also when it comes to playing an active geopolitical role via enlargement. So the most attractive leverage the EU holds is enlargement. So this cannot apply to Mongolia and Burma, but it can apply to European countries. And so with regard to the European neighborhood, I can tell you we've seen a lot of changes happening in a very rapidly. So deadlock on EU enlargement on the Western Balkans was lifted. So for 5 years I have fought with my French friends about Northern Macedonia and Albania being given the opportunity to open formal negotiations on joining EU. Now it's done. We've seen a very new ideas about offering membership to Moldova and to Ukraine, which was far off the table before the war started. There's the option for Georgia this December to be offered candidate status as well. We'll see in some weeks' time what the outcome of the elections in Turkey will be. So if the pro-European opposition wins, there will be a need for reaction by the European Union as well. Just imagine a new government setting free all the political prisoners, reforming the judiciary and so on, engaging in peace talks with Kurds, then Europe must be present at the table again. You cannot discard this. And then take the economic consequences of COVID-19 and the idea of reallocating value change and delivery change, bringing them closer to Europe, then you have a whole lot of to do in the European neighborhood. But you also have to admit that there are some very unresolved issues in the European neighborhood, which is more to the southern shores of the Mediterranean, so Libya, still looming large, democratic backsliding in Tunisia. But I think we've seen that the European Union can act as a major player in the European neighborhood. And well, from a German perspective, it's all about strengthening the EU roles in that.
Thank you, Nils, so much. You spoke about several things. One was on the Germans losing their illusions towards Russia, about Russia. The other was about, which I would somewhat summarize as the politics change, right? So in this case, we have upcoming elections in Turkey. That could actually be a positive signal. Georgia could actually become a candidate country potentially December this year. So I have a very provocative question to you then in this case. What should Russia do so that we, European Union in this case, not only Germany, could start considering changing our current attitude towards it?
Russia.
It's quite simple answer.
Well, they should withdraw from Ukraine and give back full sovereignty to Ukraine. That would be a good start. But even after that, I doubt that any idea of entering a large partnership with Russia will be realistic as long as the course of Russian foreign policy is as aggressive and as imperialistic as it has been over the last years. So the most likely evolution of Western-Russian relations in the foreseeable future might be any regain of interest on both sides in some kind of arms control. That this could be a sort of minimum service, but even that, with the experience of Russia terminating several of the arms control treaties unilaterally, is very unlikely to happen soon. So we have to understand that, as you mentioned it, Russia is in a long game, and we are in a protracted confrontation with Russia, which takes different forms, and the room for dialogue and partnership is very narrow, and it's hard to fancy out how this room could be widened anytime soon.
Thank you, Nils, so much. We have a great audience present, and we already have hands up. So in this case, if you colleagues also want to comment on each other's comments in this case, then again, let's keep it short and tangle them into the responses of the audience. We have about 15 minutes left after these excellent explanations, excellent interventions. Atis Lēņš, you go. Microphone is over there, Atis, but please keep it short and simple.
Short. Yes, I retired from Latvian politics. I was in the Latvian Saeima and worked with security policy. I have a question to an honourable Finnish member. You focused on domestic issues that's stopping Sweden from joining NATO, and I assume you meant Turkey. What's Hungary up to? That's number one. The other question is it domestic politics for Turkey? Isn't it more than that? Turkey bought S-400s. America stopped the F-35 components. Isn't Turkey using this as a card? The American card to force America changing its policy towards armament in Turkey?
See, it's still 22 hours to go until membership, but already everybody has forgotten about Finland and asked you about everybody else.
No, if I would be here as a political capacity, I would be willing to give you a more detailed answer, but I'm here more as a diplomat today, so I have to be a bit more cautious. I meant, and I said that we do understand the domestic political circumstances both in Hungary and Turkey, which has affected the decision-making structure and the timetable what they have. But of course, it's a self-evident fact, but we do also see the foreign policy elements in both countries, take into account what kind of foreign policy assessments and what foreign policy priorities they have at the moment. And I think I don't have to go to details, and we don't have the time to go to details on that perspective. But in the end, as I said, the both countries came assessment concerning the Finland that it is in their interest, it is in the European interest, and it's a broader global interest to ratify. And I'm sure they will come to the same conclusion also with the Sweden. But that will also only take the certain time that is needed. It might be until the Turkish elections in May. The Hungarian friends, and you know, we are relatives in many respects, has said that they will never be the last one to ratify the Swedish entry. So that actually they said also about the Finland, and that happened 24 hours before the Turkey ratified. So I'm quite optimistic also that will come in there in due time. But if you allow me very, very briefly, because I really would like to have the audience to take the floor, to comment, because there was such an interesting and intriguing interventions by my colleague. And I really come back to the fact that we have to be very realistic, and this I'm quite blunt with the fact. The current European Union is not capable, and it cannot absorb the new enlargement in the way that we are discussing about. The fact is that the European Union is always progressing through the crisis. We've been living a certain kind of crisis. Immediate response to the Russian aggression against the Ukraine has been, in a way, success story in the European Union. I think European Union deserves the credit when it really comes with the fact that we've been able to have these 10, 11 sanction packages, and we've been able to do that with unified format. But the fact is that having a larger European Union demands first of all of us inside the European Union to check in the mirror and to see what kind of structures we have in there and how it's capable of functioning also in the future. Because of the war, people tend to forget that we actually had this convention of the future, which has a wonderful suggestions, which was hosted in Strasbourg. President Macron was there receiving these kind of suggestions. So we tend to forget because other pressing crises are coming in there. So the fact is that we inside the European Union need to have this soul search, in which we have not been able to done for the various reasons. All the member states has elections coming in due times. You have other political consideration, pandemics, energy crisis, etc., etc. But we are not able to do that without having first that thorough discussion there. And I don't know whether we need to have the Franco-German engine again for initiating this one. Usually we've been needing that. Today I think we need a lot of also Polish contributions, and don't forget, and this will be interesting discussion, what is the Franco-German Polish future in the development of the European Union. But also same comes with the candidate countries that we have. There's a wonderful saying in English saying that you need to talk the talk and walk the walk. And I think we're having more the talk than having the walk. And these are the issues that also have to take into account when we come into this kind of situation.
Excellent. Yes, please.
Sentence, because I'm not in a diplomatic role today, so yes, obviously. This is the one side of the story. The other side of the story is scoring political bonus points at home prior to the election.
Which is the domestic politics.
Yes, so just to make it very short.
Thank you, colleagues. Yes, please. Well,
my name is Tacan İldem, retired ambassador from Turkey, and I thought that coming from Turkey, I may add my voice to the discussion. It is true, it is a domestic issue, but one has to make a distinction whether it is a party politics or bipartisan attitude supported by the overwhelming majority of the population. Fighting against terrorism is a big issue in Turkey. We suffered a lot. Therefore, the sensitivities are there, and it's quite normal. The trilateral mechanism put in place last year in Madrid was a brilliant idea, and a big progress was achieved. My humble opinion is that after the elections, there will certainly be the ratification process speeded up to meet the Vilnius summit meeting deadline. But in any case, the this trilateral mechanism should continue with a view to addressing those standing issues already in place. Thank you. And
Thank you.
congratulations to Finland.
Thank you.
Thank you.
For the confirmation.
Thank you, Ambassador. Your position over the year has nicely changed to the positive side.
Can I briefly say
Sure,
before the
sure,
question
please.
comes about this Russia, because this is intriguing. I'm chairing the Barents Cooperation as a part of my current diplomatic duties. We're used to have Russia as a member in there. We decided to suspend Russia immediately after the war. We continue with Finland, Sweden, Norway, Denmark, Iceland, and the European Union cooperation. And we have exactly the same question and discussion. Structures are there. Russia is still in the structures, but there's no cooperation. And we have the same discussion. When can we imagine to coming back to this kind of cooperation, whatever format it is? And I think we all know the answers concerning about the war. Russia has to, our prime minister said brilliant in Vienna, Russia has to get out of the Ukraine, then we can start discussing. But the discussion is another thing, that one thing which is a question of trust and confidence. And I would say that Finland has been working for 40, 50 years with Russia, with Union Russia in different formats. What has profoundly changed that there's no trust and confidence anymore for another partner's words. And it's like a marriage, that we all know about the marriage, that if you have lost the confidence to your partner once, it is extremely difficult or nearly impossible to rebuild this trust again. And I think that's what we have with Russia at the moment.
Okay, gloomy. Please, we have a question on the second row here. Please introduce yourself, and then we're going to take the final one. Okay?
Yeah. Eleonora Tafuran-Brosetti from ISPI Milan. We've been hearing this fascinating debate about the Korean formula, let's say, and the necessity to have a just peace, not just a ceasefire. But we've also been discussing tired public opinions and the shrinking of resources. So I was wondering, is there like a middle ground between these two options, and how can we actually go for a just peace without losing the public opinion in some European countries?
Thank you. Is the question to anybody directly or just a general remark? It's a general question. Whoever wants, you can answer. And please, the final question.
So it will be a short one. Since there will be inevitably a debate about the treaties and simplification of decision-making process, either it ends in modifying treaties or keeping them as they are. It will still take time for the European to argue. So how could we, in the meantime, associate more closely the candidate states to the EU? By EPC, by observing member status or something?
Okay. Alternative options for the potential candidate countries. So in this case, that's basically what the question entitled, right? If I understood correctly. So are there any additional possibilities that we should consider? Dear colleagues, maybe let's go in the reverse order with your final remarks when we're closing. Nils, if you could please go first and then a comment on the questions that were raised, or the general question of the panel. So who is who? If you have to answer the question in 2 words, who is who in the new European neighborhood?
So, well, I'm not so sure about the middle ground, very honestly speaking. So I think the aim must remain to restore Ukraine's full territorial integrity by military and political means. So, and then it's up to the Ukrainians to decide on the precise shape of that. For us, Europeans and Western allies, in order to maintain a decent level of support, it's very important to understand that we have also to mitigate the negative effects of the war on our societies and economies. They are less pronounced than the terrible consequences of the war for the Ukrainian people, but still with the energy prices increasing. We had a debate last year in Germany how to give some financial support to middle income and low income families and so on. And I can tell you, during the meetings of my parliamentary group in the Bundestag, the Social Democratic members of the Bundestag, we did not debate much about weapons deliveries because we were all fine with what the Chancellor was doing step by step. But we had a huge debate about how to sort of shield our population against energy price hikes. I mean, I think in a democracy, you need for any foreign policy support from your domestic audience, and we've been quite good so far. And I think that Putin has underestimated our resolve and our endurance, and I'm confident that we can continue. As far as EU accession is concerned, I do not believe in any formal status below the level of full-fledged membership. What we can do is to offer some of the benefits beforehand. So granting access to some of the EU programs, which has already been part of the packages, visa liberalization, and so on. And I think since the process of joining the EU takes a lot of time, the peoples in the respective countries need these very concrete benefits before full accession. And that's, in my view, tremendously important. And so we should reflect upon these ideas and not so much about some intermediate status. And I can tell you, for example, when it comes to Georgia, but also when it comes to Ukraine, there will be the need to grant more of this support and also financial funds before full EU accession, independently of the shape EU institutions will take after this new round of accession. And I agree that we will need some treaty modification. There will be a lot of financial redistribution going on, especially in the case of agricultural policy. This will be very hard to figure out, but no new status for candidate countries.
But then it's your final remark, okay? Yeah. Briefly, and your final remark, please. Okay. Please, Mikhail.
So, first of all, I wanted to say that what my colleague from Germany is saying is like, right? Because we were actually wishing to have that position for a long time from Germany, and I find that make it happen, right? And it comes from people. And as my dear colleague said, so it's about democracy. It's about people's choice. Just recently, 2 weeks ago, I visited a small town, German town, where I was an exchange student and lived in a German family. And even at that local level, in small towns in Germany, there is an understanding that this is the way forward. You know, to defeat Russia and Ukraine, to restore Ukraine's territorial integrity, and move with the candidate status and the full-fledged membership of Eastern European countries. And there is no middle ground. Any middle ground, any alternative decisions, this is a win of Russia. So this is the moment when European people support European politicians, and European politicians have to use this momentum and move forward, make proactive steps, which will make Europe stronger.
Thank you, Mikhail. Velina, please.
Absolutely, 100%. In times of war, middle ground is the other word of nothing. The other word of nothing. Middle ground means proceed as usual and expect different results. Absolutely the opposite. Explain to people that Russia is waging a non-kinetic. I really want to highlight, I mean, I don't need to highlight it here in Latvia, but if I say this in Austria, I'm like the biggest warmonger ever. When I explain, and this is the most important task for politicians, this is not the task of the experts and consultants, to explain to people that Russia has launched and has been waging a non-kinetic war against the European people, the European states. This is also a way how you can actually win a war nowadays. In an interconnected world, you don't always need to fight with weapons. This is what they are doing against the Ukrainians. But here, the invisible warfare that has been waged since 24th of February is against the European people in the European states, changing governments, using nuclear blackmail, because people still remember Chernobyl. The fear of nuclear explosion is so high that they would be pressuring their governments to actually exercise influence on Ukraine, to concede, to start talks, you know? So this kind of middle ground, there is no middle ground. On the 24th, the one side decided that there cannot be middle ground, and now we need to all arrive on the same page. What is needed is to communicate strategically. This is a long war, and we all need to prepare accordingly. We need to prepare our defense industries. Our politicians need to give green light to the defense industries to start actually preparing accordingly, because nobody, and I say nobody, around the world perceive us in Europe as, maybe with few exceptions, as a security provider. Everyone around the world knows that Europe actually is not able to protect its own vicinity. And if it had not been for the Americans, Ukraine would have collapsed by now. These are the realities. Let's start with the diagnosis before deriving any conclusions for politics, for industries, and for the people. And people are not stupid, they will understand. Actually, what politics is very often doing, as I said, is trying to treat the symptoms, the fears of people, you know, just to get re-elected. But this time it's not the same. So, no middle ground, please. It's a long war, it's a war of attrition, and it's a war against all of us. So let's get our act together. And speaking of the second question, no alternatives. We have the most successful European project ever. That has been the European integration. I mean, look at us. Right now, I have three mentalities in me thanks to European integration. I'm one of these, I argue, successful products of European integration, and we are all part of this. This is our biggest investment. Actually, our biggest strength, if we compare to Russia, are the people. This is our strategic investment. Look at Ukraine, what has happened in 8 years. In 8 years, from 2014 until the attack, what has been happening to society, to institutions, why there was this big contrast when Russian soldiers were entering Ukrainian villages and they were shocked by the level of development. So, European integration, this is the final goal, and sorry, but Western Balkan region to absorb 450 million cannot absorb the Western Balkan region, and the Western Balkan region would affect the acquis communautaire or the level of democracy and the level of institutions. Is absolutely unserious to speak about. The big, of course, issue is how we will be able to accommodate the European integration when it comes to the Eastern European region. Of course, this is the big question mark. We have the second largest European country, and of course, next to it, Georgia and Moldova. I absolutely agree. The front runners are part of this.
Thank you, Evelina, so much. Jari?
Very, very, very. I would continue, as you said, that the European Union itself and European enlargement is the most successful peace process that we have seen in the world. And I think this is something that we have to also acknowledge in that respect. But it is also self-evident fact that current European Union cannot absorb any more countries without a certain treaty changes. The treaty changes is evident and they have to be done. What happens before that is exactly as Nils said next to me, that we need to integrate these candidate countries step by step, making actually irreversible processes what they are doing in there, because we also have lessons to learn from our past enlargement process that what we have. But actually I bring one more element in there which has not been mentioned before, and I honestly say this is a good idea. The fact is that the European Union is also joining very soon the Council of Europe and the Human Rights Treaty in there. The Council of Europe is a marvelous place for the training for the candidate countries, for the acquis community of the European Union, and the values, especially the values what we have in there. So we should not forget the existing structures that actually we already have that we can use and utilize for these kind of purposes also in the future. So let's not forget the Council of Europe itself. Actually, Foreign Minister Kuleba and myself were the ambassadors there at the same time, exactly discussing the same issues, then in a peaceful Ukraine, and question what Ukraine can also have in that. But the question of just peace, this is a wonderful question, and I use example from our history. 1939, Finland was attacked by the Soviet Union, and its so-called Winter War started, which lasted 105 days. You can imagine that why the Finns has been so passionate about Ukraine, because we have such a feeling that what we felt and suffered is so much similar what Ukraine is. We had to make the peace in after 105 days of fighting. We lost 30,000 soldiers. We lost 20% of our territory. We removed every people who lived in the territory which was given the Soviet Union. 370,000 people were moved away from that area. It was not a just peace, on the contrary. But throughout the decades, and especially follow what happened Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Poland, Bulgaria, Romania, when these countries were annexed by the Soviet Union, actually the peace that took our territory away but kept our independence became a successful peace treaty. But it took decades before that became as one of the core elements of our pride, the fact that we survived in the Winter War. My grandfather was there. But what is the just peace? I think that only Ukrainians themselves can define what is the peace which is acceptable for the Ukraine, what kind of political compromises must be done, and there must be political compromises before the peace can be there. And we've seen some opinion polls that what the Ukrainians are willing to do or not willing to do. I think it's quite evident in this stage of the war, President Zelensky do not have room for the maneuver. President Putin is not willing to have any room for the maneuver. That's why I'm afraid we'll just have to wait and see what kind of peace comes. I don't know whether you can ever call it a just peace, but I hope it's a peace that will maintain the functions and the core of the Ukraine heart and soul. Because what Putin had done, he has created the Ukrainian nation with this war.
Thank you. Thank you, Jari, so much. Mikola, the last word is to you, the last word to Ukraine.
Yeah, thank you. Instead of discussing Finland's experience, as we used at least partly before the war, we are now discussing the scenarios of the Korean War, or which seems more appropriate for me, the scenario of Iranian-Iraqi war, which also had one party being sanctioned and being able to wage a long-lasting war and then stabilize economically at a lower level. So this is the demonstration of a mismanagement of the regional security. So what I have been warning against quite for a long time between 14 and 22 is simple solutions which have not been effective in dealing with the conflict in Donbass and Minsk agreements, handling Minsk agreements and other security issues. And this is the same thing which is now a danger or a risk for the European Union. Simple solutions are not going to work. And for instance, providing additional 100 billion euro for defense may not be a rapid solution because military potentials have cumulative effects, and you will have to spend consistently much more money every year for many years to come in order to develop this geopolitical element of security. And this is only one of the examples. So getting back to the question of who is who in the European neighborhood, I would surely say that Russia is a threat. Countries in the neighborhood are both opportunities and risks, and dangers are everywhere for the EU. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mikola, so much. And many, many, many thanks for the great discussion, for a bold and frank discussion, to the panelists, to the audience, all of you. of course, to the Friedrich-Ebert Foundation for supporting us, Martin Švargos, Latvian Institute of National Affairs, for putting all this all together, and of course our partners, the European Commission representation here in Latvia. Round of applause to the panelists, please.